December 30th, 2006, 6:05 a.m. in Baghdad. The trapdoor opened and the noose tightened. Saddam Hussein was dead. But as the dictator's body went cold, two women remained in the shadows of exile. Their lives were tied to his. They had shared his bed and raised his heirs. They had seen the rise of the regime and its total collapse. What happened to these women after the execution? The world watched the hanging. No one watched them. Their fate would surprise even those who studied the Hussein dynasty. For 30 years, Saddam Talfa and Samira Shahbandar lived in a cycle of luxury and violence. They walked on polished marble floors. They wore diamonds worth millions of dollars. A single look from them could end a career or a life. It was a life of absolute power. But then, the golden cages shattered, the palaces burned, the bank accounts were frozen, their husband was dead, and the protection was gone. To understand their fall, we must first look at their beginning. Saddam Talfa was more than a wife. She was his cousin. This was a marriage of blood and politics. She was the first lady of Iraq. She controlled the social circles of Baghdad with an iron grip. She didn't just spend money, she moved it. She hoarded gold while the country starved under sanctions. Then there was Samira, the second wife, the hidden one. She was the daughter of an aristocratic family. Saddam saw her and took her. He forced her husband to divorce her. It was a scandal kept in the dark. At first glance, they were rivals. But in reality, they were both prisoners of the same man. The footage from the era shows the scale: massive military parades, gold-plated Kalashnikovs, the sound of thousands of boots hitting the pavement. In the center of it all stood the wives. They were symbols of the Ba'athist Party's reach. Events accelerated. The 2003 invasion changed everything. The statues fell. The palaces were looted. The jewelry was seized by soldiers. The women fled. How did they escape the country? The borders were closed. High-tech satellites scanned the desert. Yet, both women vanished into the night. They left behind the marble halls for the uncertainty of foreign lands. The sound of the gallows was the final signal. There was no turning back. The era of the Hussein women had ended. The transition from queens to fugitives was complete. 1963. This was the year Saddam Hussein married his first cousin, Saddam Talfa. It was not a romantic union, it was a cold political merger. Saddam was the daughter of Khairullah Talfa, Saddam's uncle and his most influential mentor. By marrying her, Saddam didn't just start a family, he anchored himself to a powerful tribal lineage. Why did Saddam choose his own cousin? The answer was simple. In the tribal landscape of Tikrit, blood was the only currency. This marriage consolidated his base of support within the clan. It was a calculated move to secure his future. Sajida was born in 1937 in the dusty streets of Tikrit. She grew up in the same harsh environment as Saddam. She understood the brutal mechanics of Iraqi power. She was not a silent observer. In the footage from state banquets, she appears composed. But behind closed doors, her influence was significant. People who worked in the palace reported her fierce temper. She was one of the few individuals who could argue with Saddam and survive the night. The couple had 5 children, 2 sons, Uday and Qusay, 3 daughters, Raghad, Rana, and Hala. For 2 decades, Sajida remained the undisputed First Lady of Iraq. She managed the household and the internal politics of the Hussein family with an iron hand. She enjoyed the spoils of the regime, gold, designer clothes, and absolute authority. But how long could this stability last? In a regime built on ego, the answer was not long. In the mid-1980s, the balance shifted. Saddam met Samira Shahbandar. The contrast was sharp. Sajida was tribal and traditional. Samira was different. She was blonde, sophisticated, and highly educated. At the time, she was already married to an executive at Iraqi Airways. Saddam did not care about her marital status. He wanted her. The camera captures the change in the palace atmosphere. Sajida's face in official photos becomes more rigid. The tension was palpable. This was more than a domestic dispute. It was a crack in the foundation of the regime. The arrival of the second wife triggered a chain of events that would eventually lead to violence within the inner circle. It got worse. Saddam eventually married Samira in secret. When Sajida found out, The palace turned into a battlefield. Her brothers and sons took her side. The family was now divided. This was no longer just a marriage. It was a high-stakes political crisis. Thus began the slow erosion of the Talfa family's influence. One woman represented the past, the other represented a new, dangerous chapter. The consequences would be fatal for many. The era of Sajida's absolute control had ended. 1986. The dictator decided he wanted a new woman. He did not ask for permission. He ordered the husband of Samira Shabandar to be reassigned to a remote post, effectively clearing the way. Saddam took Samira as his second wife that same year. For a long time, the marriage stayed in the shadows. It was a state secret kept behind palace walls. The two wives were opposites. Sajida represented the old Iraq. She was tribal, traditional, and defined by blood ties. Samira was different. She was Saddam's project for a modern image. He used her for public relations. Samira accompanied him to high-profile events where Sajida's lack of polish might show. This created a fracture in the presidential household. It was a rivalry built on cold resentment. The situation turned into a powder keg. In 1988, the tension exploded. The catalyst was Saddam's eldest son, Uday. He was Sajida's firstborn and her favorite. During a party, Uday saw Kamal Hana Gageo, the dictator's personal valet and food taster. Gageo was the man who had introduced Samira to Saddam. Uday did not hesitate. In front of horrified guests, he beaten and stabbed Gageo to death. It was a public execution. The camera of the mind records the scene. The screams of guests, the blood on the floor, and Uday's total lack of remorse. He claimed he was defending his mother's honor. But the plan failed. Saddam was beyond furious. He did not see a loyal son. He saw a murderer who had killed his most trusted servant. The punishment was physical. Saddam reportedly beat Uday with a cane until he could not stand. Then he threw him into a prison cell. Sajida was caught in the middle. She looked at her husband's rage and then at her son's injuries. She made her choice. She chose her son. The family bond snapped and never healed. The schism was permanent. Sajida retreated to her own private compound. She stopped appearing in public. Meanwhile, Samira's influence grew. She moved closer to the center of power, but both women shared one trait. They were survivors. They lived in a palace where one wrong word resulted in a disappearance. Then, the world changed. Throughout the 1990s, international sanctions began to squeeze the country. The footage from this era shows gray streets and empty shops. The golden world of the elite began to tarnish. The wives watched Saddam's paranoia grow. He saw enemies in every hallway. They saw the isolation of Iraq deepen. A storm was gathering, but they were not prepared for the end. March 20th, 2003. The first missiles hit Baghdad. The sound of explosions shattered the palace windows. The American campaign of shock and awe had begun. For Sajida and Samira, the era of luxury was over. Events accelerated. The regime was collapsing. April 9th, 2003. The regime collapsed. In those first hours, Sajida and Samira moved in opposite directions across a fractured country. Their paths diverged as the empire fell. Sajida lived apart from Saddam in a separate compound with her daughters, Ragad and Rana. She was no longer the favored wife. Intelligence reports confirmed her intuition. She knew the end was approaching. Weeks before the first bombs fell, Sajida took action. She gathered bank files. She burned state archives. She packed gold and survival essentials. Years of observing Saddam's violence taught her a single rule. In Iraq, a change in power meant a massacre. The dictator's family would be the first targets. Where was Sajida when the tanks arrived? She was gone. Days before American armor reached Firdos Square, she crossed the border into Jordan. She moved at night. She used back roads. The speed of the move proved it was not a panic. It was a pre-planned extraction. Samira's escape took a different route. She was the favorite. She stayed by Saddam's side during the initial strikes. Iraqi intelligence officers later reported her presence in various Baghdad safe houses. But the circle closed. Saddam went deeper underground into the rural north. Samira vanished. How did she survive? She chose Lebanon. She did not travel light. Sources indicate she carried millions in cash and suitcases of jewelry. Sajida had tribal protection in Jordan. Samira had no such safety net. She relied on a network of Lebanese businessmen who had grown rich from Iraqi oil deals. The camera would have seen a ghost. She moved through the Beirut banking district, laundered her assets, and erased her digital footprint. She was rebuilding a life from the wreckage. At first glance, two wives fleeing a war, but in reality, two different survival strategies. The tribal wife fled to family. The mistress fled to money. The hunt for Saddam intensified. For 8 months, he moved between concrete bunkers and farmhouse cellars. His circle of loyalists shrank every week. During this period, both wives remained silent. No interviews, no letters to the Red Cross, no pleas for mercy. They understood the stakes. In the new Iraq, the name Hussein was a death sentence. Events accelerated. December 13, 2003. Operation Red Dawn reached its conclusion. Soldiers found a hole in the ground near Tikrit. The footage went global. It showed a once mighty dictator with a matted beard and dirt on his face. American medics checked his hair for lice. The image of the broken man played on every screen in the world. The era of the palaces was over. Jordan and Lebanon. Two women watched the broadcast images of the capture. Their lives had been defined by one man for 30 years. Now, that man was a prisoner in a hole. But their own struggle was not ending. It was accelerating. How did they survive the aftermath? The answer lies in a 3-year period of legal limbo. Between the capture in 2003 and the execution in 2006, they lived in a gray zone. They were not prisoners, but they were not free. Sajida arrived in Jordan with her daughters, Raghad and Rana. They were guests of King Abdullah II. The king faced a problem. He had to balance Western alliances with Arab public opinion. He granted them sanctuary on humanitarian grounds. But the price was silence. The rules were clear. No political activity, no public statements, no contact with the Iraqi resistance. The Jordanian government moved them into a villa in the Abdun district of Amman. It was a wealthy neighborhood, but it was not a palace. The footage shows the reality. Security was absolute. Jordanian intelligence officers stood at the gates. They monitored every movement. They recorded every phone call. They vetted every visitor. Sajida could move within the city, but she could not cross the border without a permit. It was a golden cage. Money became a secondary battle. The millions smuggled out of Baghdad began to vanish. Legal fees for Saddam's defense grew. The cost of living in Amman was high. Sajida had to support her daughters and grandchildren alone. The resources dwindled. Witnesses from this time report a specific detail. Sajida began selling her jewelry, one piece at a time. Each sale paid for another month of exile. It was the slow liquidation of her former life. Her daughters faced a different trauma. Raghad and Rana were widows. Their husbands, the Kamel brothers, had defected in 1995 and returned to Iraq. Saddam had them killed immediately. Now, the sisters were raising children in a country that tolerated them but did not want them. Raghad did not stay quiet. She was politically active and hated the restrictions. In July 2006, the situation broke. Jordanian authorities claimed Raghad was contacting Iraqi insurgents. They accused her of funding attacks against the new government. The truth remains unclear. It may have been a move by Jordan to distance itself from a toxic family, but the result was concrete. Raghad became a wanted woman. Sajida could only watch as her family collapsed further. Events moved to Lebanon. Samira's situation was different. Lebanon had a weak central government and fractured politics. It could not offer the structured protection found in Jordan. Samira had no palace and no official guards. Instead, she had to rely on a shadow network. A circle of fixers, lawyers, and businessmen surrounded her. Each one took a cut. Her fortune began to shrink. She moved frequently to avoid detection. No city held her for more than 3 months. Beirut, Sidon, Tripoli. She traveled through Lebanon like a ghost. Iraqi agents wanted revenge. International investigators wanted the money. Samira stayed one step ahead of both. The woman who once commanded the room now fought to be invisible. How did she manage the money? It was a complex system of shell companies. But the investigation was closing in. As the second wife, Samira knew the inner workings of the regime's finances. She had managed the Swiss bank accounts. She oversaw real estate deals in Austria. She handled investments in French corporations. Investigators tracked a web of wire transfers. Many led directly to her. Every frozen account was a blow. Every seized property made her more vulnerable. The trial of Saddam Hussein began. Both wives watched from a distance. The footage shows a surreal scene. The screens broadcast the images across the entire Arab world. The man who ruled by fear now stood in a wooden dock. He argued with the judges. He shouted over the proceedings. He tried to project power while his world crumbled. Neither Sajida nor Samira spoke to the press. They remained silent. November 5, 2006. The court delivered the verdict, death by hanging. Behind closed doors, the women prepared for the end. The execution was a mathematical certainty. It signaled a new phase of their lives. They would no longer be the wives of a prisoner. They would become the widows of an executed dictator. In Middle Eastern politics, this was a dangerous shift in status. Their protection was gone. New threats emerged from the shadows. 6 in the morning, December 30th, 2006. The pre-dawn hours changed everything. The news broke across every network. The rope had done its work. The era of the Hussein family was officially over. The world had changed. Events accelerated. There was no turning back. Thus ended the reign. December 30th, 2006, 6 in the morning. Saddam Hussein walked toward the gallows. The guards did not stay silent. They shouted insults and taunted him in his final moments. Why did they leak the video? The footage was captured on a mobile phone and broadcast to the entire planet. It was a message. This wasn't just an execution. It was the total destruction of an era. 2 women in 2 different countries watched the screens. For them, the rope didn't just end a life. It severed the final threads connecting them to power. In Amman, Jordan, Sajida Talfa waited in her villa. She was 69 years old. Her daughter stood by her side. When the news arrived, the atmosphere changed instantly. The footage shows nothing of her reaction, but witnesses inside the house described the scene. There was no screaming. No one collapsed on the floor. Sajida sat in a chair for several hours without moving. She whispered prayers. Her face remained a mask. Decades of life with Saddam had changed her. In their world, showing emotion was a tactical error. It was a luxury that cost lives. She chose silence. But this was only the beginning. Beneath the stoic exterior, a legal and tribal crisis began. According to Islamic law and Iraqi custom, Sajida held the rights to the body. As the first wife, she was responsible for the burial. The Iraqi government had a different plan. They feared a monument. They didn't want the grave to become a headquarters for the insurgency. At first glance, a legal process, but in reality, a final act of erasure. The authorities acted with speed. They moved the body to Al-Oja, a village near Tikrit. This was Saddam's birthplace. They buried him quickly in the middle of the night. No family members were allowed to attend. No funeral rites were performed. In Arab culture, a proper burial is a fundamental human dignity. Denying it is the ultimate insult. For Sajida, this was a final blow. She could not fulfill her duty as a wife. The state had taken his life, and now they had taken his remains. The power was gone. The story cut off here. December 30th, 2006. The execution of Saddam Hussein was complete. For his family, the news was a death sentence. To their grief, a new layer was added: absolute humiliation. Sajida did not accept the situation. She attempted to negotiate with the new authorities. She hired intermediaries. She sent urgent messages through Jordanian government channels. Every request was denied. Iraqi officials refused to speak with her. She was rebuffed at every turn. The hanging changed everything. It shifted the way the world saw these women. While Saddam was alive in his cell, they were still protected. They were the family of a living head of state. Now, that status was gone. They were merely the relatives of an executed war criminal. The thin layer of protection evaporated instantly. For Samira, living in Lebanon, the danger was immediate. The threats arrived within 48 hours. Iraqi Shia groups felt empowered by the execution. They released statements calling for the blood of all Hussein family members. Revenge was no longer a threat, it was a plan. The Lebanese authorities reacted quickly. They did not want the trouble Samira brought. Security officials met with her. They made it clear she was no longer welcome. She had weeks, perhaps only days, to find a new sanctuary. Her escape from Lebanon was a desperate operation. She did not go to the airport. She avoided security cameras and checkpoints. Using forged documents and a fake identity, she traveled by car. She crossed the border into Syria. It was late 2006. Syria had not yet descended into civil war. The Assad regime still offered a haven for former Iraqi Baathists. But this safety was an illusion. Samira moved into a house under an assumed name. She rarely stepped outside. She was entirely dependent on the Syrian government. Support could be withdrawn at any second. Back in Jordan, Sajida faced a different reality. The palace walls felt thinner. The cameras recorded her isolation. There was no going back. January 2006. The Iraqi government launched a formal offensive. They demanded the immediate extradition of every surviving member of the Hussein family. This included Sajida Talfa and her 3 daughters. The goal was a public trial. Baghdad did not need specific evidence of crimes. They wanted the family to stand as symbols of a fallen regime. Jordan refused the request. King Abdullah cited humanitarian grounds, but the political climate was a pressure cooker. The king was caught between 2 fires. On one side, the Jordanian public. Many locals and refugees viewed Saddam as a symbol of resistance. They opposed handing over his family. On the other side, Western allies and Gulf neighbors. They wanted the Hussein legacy erased. The solution was not a handoff, but a slow strangulation. Jordan began making their lives unbearable. The goal was simple: force them to leave voluntarily. Sajida's movements were restricted to a few rooms. Her residency permit was downgraded to temporary status. Every few months, she had to face bureaucratic hurdles to stay. It was a calculated humiliation. Access to her bank accounts was choked off. Then came the hardest blow. Authorities denied entry to several of her grandchildren. The regime separated a grandmother from her bloodline. The footage from this era shows nothing. There are no public appearances, only silence from behind palace walls. The psychological shift was total. For 30 years, these women were the elite. Their words decided who lived and who died. Now, they were supplicants. They relied on the mercy of officials who viewed them as toxic relics. It was a fall from absolute power to absolute irrelevance. But the real damage came from the inside. The execution of Saddam triggered a family collapse. Long-standing grudges surfaced. Some relatives issued public statements. They disowned Sajida and her daughters to save their own reputations. They wanted to start over without the Hussein name. The family was no longer a unit. It was a collection of survivors. Some turned to silence. Others began to fight over what remained of the family's shadow. The inner circle had finally broken. He blamed the wives. He accused them of failing to save Saddam and losing the family fortune. The unity that once held the regime together vanished in exile. The family turned on itself. January 2007 arrived. For Sajida and her daughters, the initial shock of the execution ended. A new, slower nightmare began. Long-term exile meant daily humiliation and growing pressure. Every month reminded them of their fall from power. Sajida's status in Jordan collapsed. The Iraqi government acted fast. In 2007, they placed her on the national most wanted list. They offered a cash reward for her capture. Jordan refused to hand her over, but the damage was done. She became a pariah. Banks froze her accounts. Lawyers stopped answering her calls. Even luxury boutiques in Amman treated her as a risk. The money ran out. The Jordanian government provided a small monthly stipend, but then they cut the funding. Then they cut it again. By 2008, Sajida was desperate. She began selling her remaining assets. The footage would show a different woman. She sold a diamond necklace looted from the Kuwaiti royal family during the 1990 invasion. Every transaction happened in secret. Buyers knew she was cornered. They offered fractions of the true value. She had no choice but to take the cash. Her body began to fail. Years of stress and the lack of elite medical care took a toll. She developed diabetes. This was compounded by severe depression. She refused to seek help. In her world, mental illness was a source of shame. She maintained a cold facade while her health disintegrated. Her daughters were also trapped. In 2007, Interpol issued a red notice for Raghat. The charge, funding the Iraqi insurgency. She became a prisoner within Jordan. She could not work. She could not travel. Was she safe? No. Iraqi intelligence marked her as a target. Several assassination plots were reported. The details were kept quiet, but the threat was real. She lived behind high walls and armed guards. Rana, the younger daughter, chose silence. She tried to disappear, but her children faced a different struggle. The new Iraqi government stripped Saddam's grandchildren of their citizenship. Jordan refused to grant them nationality. They were stateless. The grandchildren attended elite private schools under fake identities. They sat in classrooms with children who had no idea who they were. One of history's most violent legacies was sitting in the next desk. The dynasty was over. Only the legal battles and the debt remained. 2008. Jordan officially shuts down the Iraqi embassy section handling their affairs. It was more than a bureaucratic shift. It was a complete severance. They lost every official channel for communication. Property claims were frozen. Legal issues became impossible to resolve. They became ghosts in the eyes of the law. They existed in a legal vacuum with no path forward. Samira's path in Syria followed a different trajectory. In the beginning, Damascus offered a shield. The Assad regime kept former Ba'athists close as a strategic move against the new Iraqi government. She moved into the Meza district. The apartment was modest. Surveillance cameras watched every entrance. Security officials lived on every floor. The protection was constant, but so was the observation. Between 2007 and 2010, Samira found stability. She had saved enough cash to live without fear of hunger. She stayed away from microphones. She cut all ties with Iraqi opposition groups. Her name began to disappear from the news cycles. Some reports from these years mention a quiet life. She bought canvases and oil paints. She created abstract art in total isolation. No one ever saw the finished work. But did this peace last? It did not. The Arab Spring arrived. 2011, protests turned into a civil war. Syria was burning. The Assad regime shifted its focus to its own survival. The protection for Iraqi exiles vanished overnight. The Meza district became a front line. Tank shells hit buildings. The sound of heavy machine gun fire echoed through the streets. Samira had to move. She left with almost nothing. The woman who once boarded private jets was now on foot. She joined the massive lines of refugees pushing toward the Turkish border. The footage from the time shows thousands of people carrying plastic bags and dusty suitcases. But Samira was not like the others. Anonymity was impossible for her. Her face was a liability. Iraqi agents were searching for her. Syrian rebels viewed her as a collaborator with the old regime. Islamic extremists saw her as a trophy from a secular dictatorship. She was a target for everyone. There was no safety in the crowd. There was only the hunt. The situation was critical. The story reached a breaking point.